hell of a thing. Donald Trump's nephew says, yes, Trump is racist. He utilizes the N-word, provides a specific scenario where Trump said the N-word over and over again, but other people in the family, they've echoed the same thing. But those outside of the Trump family were very clear that this man is racist. I want to remind you, before we get into the new book from his nephew, of the Central Park Five.
You better believe that I hate the people that took this girl and her brutally. You better believe it.
The vicious and beating of a 30-year-old investment banker, Trisha Miley, who was jogging in Central Park last night. 5 youths are in custody and are being questioned. The youngest is only 13.
Trump put his money where his mouth is by taking out this full-page ad in 4 New York City newspapers. Bring back the death penalty.
When I first saw this ad that Donald Trump made, I knew that this famous person calling for us to die was very serious.
5 teens between the ages of 15 and 17 were charged with numerous sodomy and assault counts.
In 1989, myself and 4 other individuals were arrested and falsely accused of the Central Park Jogger in a case that became widely known as the Central Park Jogger case. We became known as the Central Park Five. In 2002, we were found to be innocent after the real perpetrator came forward, and that was confirmed by DNA evidence.
That's just part of his legacy of racism. Dr. Yusuf Salaam, who was speaking there, a dear friend of mine now, a council member representing Harlem, remarkable human being. There's an interview I did with him in front of college students. Check it out if you can. With millions watching and many people benefiting from this program called Indisputable, we just need 1% of the viewers to become a paid member so we can continue to bring this content to you. Now back to the show. When the Civil War was fought in the United States of America, they want you to believe it was fought over something called states' rights. It was fought over one particular state right, the right to own Black people, which also came with the right to brutally assault, molest, and murder them. It was human trafficking, is what it was. So the echo that happens today from Trump supporters talking about bringing back the Civil War, you cannot dismiss the origin of that proclamation, which is rooted, once again, in racism. Here it is.
I'm afraid if we lose this one, it's going to take a civil war to save the country, and it will be saved. It's the greatest experiment in the history of mankind. And if we come down to a civil war, I'm glad we got people like Schmitty and the Bikers for Trump on our side.
This is Ohio State Senator George Lang calling for a civil war if Trump loses the election. He later said he regrets making those remarks, but they aren't the first of their kind from MAGA Republicans. Recently, Trump himself said,
if we don't win this election, we may never have another election. I'm telling you, this may be our last election.
And numerous politicians on the right have signaled they won't accept the election results if Trump doesn't win.
Yes or no? Will you accept the election results of 2024?
I look forward to President Trump being the 47th president.
Other MAGA politicians and pundits have also suggested the possibility of a civil war.
We become totally unhinged if Donald Trump is not elected in November.
We are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
I don't want a civil war. I don't want to have to draw my rifle. I want to make this problem go away with my legislative means of doing so.
Harris campaign spokesperson Amar Moussa responded to Senator Lang's Civil War prediction in a statement saying, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are running a campaign openly sowing hatred and promising revenge against their political opponents. It's a feature, not a bug, of their campaign and message to the American people. That's why a Republican official was empowered to predict a civil war while introducing these candidates.
There's a whole lot more. Let me get into it. So Donald Trump's nephew recalls a situation where the future US president went on an N-word tirade, all right? Here's the book that is coming out next week in America. At the start of this book, you will see the New York real estate career of Trump profiled, surveying damage to a beloved car, and according to the nephew, furiously started using the N-word. The shocking scene appears in the book All in the Family, The Trumps and How We Got This Way by Fred C. Trump III, which will be published once again next week. The Guardian obtained a copy, quote, N-words. I recall him saying disgustedly, look what the N-words did, Fred Trump writes, describing his uncle's racist outburst. In the midst of a tumultuous election in which Trump faces VP Kamala Harris, the first woman of color to be vice president, the book may prove explosive. Allegations of racism have followed Trump through his life in business and in politics. Rumors persist that tape exists of Trump using the N-word during his time on The Apprentice, the hit NBC show that propelled him towards politics, though none have emerged yet. Omarosa, a black contestant, has said she's heard such a tape. Trump, however, denies it. So there are people who will say, so what? He may have used the N-word. As a matter of fact, when it was all but certain that the tape may come out, we have recordings of his surrogates coming up with spin, trying to figure out how to spin the potential use of the N-word from then President Donald Trump before he became the nominee and the winner of the contest. So they're willing to vouch for a racist. They're willing to protect them. They're willing to spin. They're willing to do whatever they need to do in order to have their proxy to power and money. But instead of trying to figure out how racist Trump is, then there are those who will argue, well, is Trump really racist or not? Does he protect racists? Does he applaud them? Does he listen to them? Does he invite them over to his Mar-a-Lago mansion to have dinner with him? There's more. Since winning the Republican nomination for president in 2016, through 4 years in the White House and in his third presidential campaign, Trump has repeatedly used racist language and has faced accusations of race baiting. This is red meat to his followers, by the way. He has denied all allegations. Nonetheless, Fred C. Trump III describes in detail a stunning moment he says happened in the early 1970s at the house of his grandparents, Donald Trump's parents in Queens, New York. It was, quote, just a normal afternoon for preteen me, Trump III writes. But then his uncle arrived. Donald was pissed. Trump III writes, boy, was he pissed. Trump says his uncle showed him his white Cadillac Eldorado convertible in its retractable canvas top. Quote, there was a giant gash at least 2 feet long and another shorter gash next to it. N-words, he says. N-words, I recall him saying disgustedly. Look at what the N-words did. I knew that was a bad word. Trump III writes, had not seen whoever damaged his car. Instead, he saw the damage, then went straight to the place where people's minds sometimes go when they face a fresh affront across the racial divide. Fred C. Trump III is a successful New York real estate executive outside the Trump firm. And because of his experiences as a parent, a campaigner in support of the intellectually and developmentally disabled. He is not the first Trump to write a book about growing up in a family led by Trump Sr., Fred Trump Sr., a New York construction and real estate magnate, and containing the future president. In 2020, Fred C. Trump, the third sister, Mary Trump, published the bestseller, Too Much or Never Enough. Promoting that book, she said her uncle was, quote, clearly racist, adding that she had heard him using racist language, quote, and I don't think that should surprise anybody given how racist he is today. Mayor Trump will release another memoir this year about the sad life and early death of her and Fred C. Trump's the third's father, Fred Trump Jr., the oldest son, who nonetheless saw his younger brother take over the family business. When Fred Trump Sr. died, Trump III and his sister were effectively disinherited by their uncles and aunts before reaching a settlement in 2020. When Mary Trump released her memoir and Donald Trump attempted to block it, her brother distanced himself from the project. But this June, when Simon & Schuster announced Trump III's own book, it promised candid and revealing, never before told stories that would shed light into the darker corner of the Trump empire. The publisher also said Trump III was motivated to write by the 2024 election and suggested his book might shape the decision of a nation. The book spares little in its portrayal of Trump attitudes about race of Queens in the 1960s and 70s. Trump III says it was, quote, one of the most diverse places on the planet, but also one of contrast between Jamaica Estates, the affluent white neighborhood where the Trumps lived, and areas where majority of people of color lived as well. Quote, if something bad happened to residents of Jamaica Estates, Trump III writes, they were the ones who did it. Almost certainly it was them. He considers a key question. So was Donald a racist? Noting that, quote, people have been asking for decades. Trump III says his uncle used the N-word at a time when he says people said all kinds of crude, thoughtless, prejudiced things, adding, quote, maybe everyone in Queens was a racist then. Trump III says he did not hear his grandfather, Fred Trump Sr., use the N-word, but he did hear him sometimes say other slurs. And tenants were uniformly white. That had to mean something, didn't it? Question mark. Let's put it up. Put up the picture. Okay. 1973. Fred Trump Sr., Donald Trump, and Trump Company, they were sued. Why? They were sued by the U.S. Justice Department for being racist. Racial discrimination at the New York housing development, Trump III writes. This was a painful period for the company, and therefore for Donald, all the publicity was bad. The R word, racist, was thrown around. The Trumps had to settle. No admission of guilt, however. Trump III also addresses the grandfather's apparent arrest at a KKK rally in 1927, which he says surprised the family when it was recently reported. Why is this important? It's important because he's in a position to create policy. The tapestry of his own background provides significant context as to the man he is today, or the piece of a man he attempts to be. Embracing the most bigoted among us, platforming them, praising them, saying that they are good patriots and Americans, it gives you an idea of his pedigree. All right. Was interesting book, not a surprising saga. What say you?
No, it's not surprising at all. I don't think anybody who's paid attention to Donald Trump's history, specifically as a public figure, could make the argument that Donald Trump has never been racist or never held racist thoughts. Like, I don't know how you credibly make that argument considering Donald Trump's track record as it regards race here in America. And, you know, I'm glad you played that clip of some of the stuff that Donald Trump said surrounding the Central Park Five. I think people need to understand the atmosphere around New York City, specifically at the time. It was a especially divisive one racially throughout the city. So there was that Central Park jogger case, which the Central Park Five were wrongly convicted, ended up serving, over a decade in prison for a crime they didn't commit. Before that, 5 years before that, was the so-called subway vigilante, a guy named Bernard Gaetz, who shot 4 young people, minorities on the train. The guy was called a freaking hero for it, ended up serving less than a year for said crimes, right? And there was this idea of lawlessness on the train being perpetuated by the city's Black and brown communities. And here comes Donald Trump into that, divisive atmosphere. And what does he do? He adds fuel to the fire. Folks will remember when he came down them damn escalators, when he's painting this picture of just blood and gore and craziness at the border of these called and criminal Mexicans. They're not sending their best. That was the most animating feature of his campaign, most people would argue. He made his bones on this idea of immigration and an out of control border. Like that's who Donald Trump has been. Like it doesn't. Me and Dr. Richie don't need to carve some narrative for you guys. This is what is on the public record. What I think is quite interesting, though, is how these guys figure how to spin this going forward in terms of the Trump campaign. Because if the polling is to be believed, his coalition is blacker, it's browner, it's younger. And I wonder how he's going to square what his instincts have been racially, with this new, just broader coalition. Like, if we'll see what happens in November when people actually go out and vote. But boy, it seems like he's got a more diverse and broad coalition. And I wonder how he handles that going forward, because doing this is not going to work.
Yeah. Well said. And the irony is, the campaign is supposed to be browner and blacker, et cetera. But they officially got rid of all of their caucus advocacy groups, Latinos, Republican Latinos, Black Republicans, et cetera. All of those groups have been dismissed summarily by the RNC. And somehow they still proclaim that this is the party that invites them to the big tent, so to speak.